What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 67, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I am interviewing Scott Spaulding. He is now the host of the I'm Antiwar podcast. Links for the show will be in the show notes page. You can also find him on Twitter at MDVet and then the number 4. So be sure to check out Scott's work. We have a great show today about his podcast, I'm Antiwar, what's going on in Afghanistan, Yemen and Myanmar, of course, the site of the recent coup. So great show lined up for today. I'm very excited to get to that interview. Just want to make a few announcements before I get into that. First up, if you are wanting to donate to this show, you could now do that at subscribestar.com. The link there is in the show notes page, or Subscribestar Conflicts of Interest. You should find the show. And if anybody who's donating at least $5 a month, I will let you into a private Discord channel that I'm setting up. Recommend guests for the show, or different news topics to talk about, or just chat about what's going on in the world with other like-minded people. That's subscribestar.com. I also now have links for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash wallets in the show notes page. So if you want to donate to the show in crypto, you could do that. Also, the show is now, the full catalog is up on Library. That's LRBY. The link to the Conflicts of Interest page is in the show notes. And also the link if you want to donate to the show in the LRBY cryptocurrency. I had a big donation come in today, so I appreciate that very much. Anybody who is donating to the show through crypto, if you want to get in on the Discord channel, please send me either an email or a Facebook, Twitter message, and I will let you into that private group. I really appreciate all the support, and it's been awesome to see. The last way you could support the show is by supporting the sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is where you go to get your CBD products. If you're already somebody who uses CBD, you know the great benefits of it, from pain relief to reducing anxiety. So go check out their products. They're all lab tested results, so you could get the gummies, the extracts, the soft gels, however you feel that CBD works best for you. You could get any of the products there. If you're new to CBD and want to find out the benefits, check out the education tab at PalomaVerdeStore.com. Or I could personally say that it's helped me with headaches and with relieving some minor pain. So PalomaVerdeStore.com. Be sure to use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out to get a discount, and let them know that you came from the show. Now let's get into the interview with Scott Spaulding. Hey Scott, how's it going?
Hey, doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing well. Well, some changes for you since the last time we talked. Your new podcast, I'm Antiwar, is up and running. You got a few episodes in the bank. So why don't you just talk a little bit about the show? It's something different. I like it. They're small, small little segments that you're doing there. And, it's not, this is a show about Yemen, or this is a show about the Iran nuclear deal. So talk a little bit about what you're doing there.
So my idea was basically that it's to get people talking about the little moments and pivot points that made them start questioning war, whether it was like just seeing a TV show episode or a movie. So I have a few episodes in the can about myself and sort of my progression. But yeah, it's called Why I'm Antiwar. You can find it on Twitter at Antiwar Podcast. And the idea is, instead, like, there's so many people like yourself and Scott Horton and a million other people that have all the facts and reasons that we need, and I'm glad to refer people to that. But I was looking for that niche where I could start to pivot people on that emotional point, because I think that's a part that, that's an appeal that has to be made to a lot of people. Not everyone is a reason bot, So I was trying to I thought that I saw a little hole, and I try to make them short, 5-10 minutes max, so that people can share them, and maybe it'll get somebody else if they hear that this song changed my mind about war just a little bit. Maybe they'll play that song once just to hear it for themselves, and maybe it'll change somebody else's mind, and kind of make the chain keep moving.
Right. And I don't know if this was intentional on your part, but one of the things I liked, at least about the first four episodes, is they're each different kind of in category, where one is a song, one's like a personal story, one's a little bit more philosophical. And so I don't know. It's just very interesting how, like, it's not like you picked four different songs, or, this thing happened to me and then I saw this and then I read about that, or anything, but it's a variety of different things, and probably a good lesson for those of us who are trying to talk to other people about these issues, and saying, oh, they just drone bombed a kid in Yemen and they're starving them all to death. Now aren't you anti-war and think just like me? And when they're not, you can't be too frustrated with that. And yeah, so what song do you recommend?
Well, so one of the ones for me was Bob Dylan's "Masters of War." That was one that got me thinking. And then I have a few others kind of in the back of my mind to do some backup episodes if nobody else has any. But there's so much great anti-war music, anti-war movies that sometimes the message doesn't go through the right way with those. But there's so many things out there that maybe affected people. So I just want to hear other people's stories. So if anybody has any ideas, contact me and let me know what your story is. Anything that affected you emotionally that made you question war.
All right. Well, and you got a big guest coming up with the show probably next week. So everybody, make sure you go to Why I'm Anti-War. I'm sure you're up on all the podcatchers and stuff,
Yep.
and hit the subscribe button. That way you don't miss that good episode to come. Let's talk about Afghanistan here, which, according to this new study just released today, leaving Afghanistan too soon could trigger a civil war and hand the Taliban victory. So, with that study out, it looks like that's going to back up these plans to for the Biden administration to stay in Afghanistan. We also have reports of foreign troops to stay in Afghanistan beyond the May deadline.
Introducing new
I guess we're getting,
coffee.
they're saying too soon to leave now and international forces are going to stay. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, the one craziest part of that decision or that finding, the claim that there's going to be a civil war, it kind of neglects the fact that, like, a car bomb went off in Kabul just yesterday or the day before. I mean, for them to pretend that the government there even has any real ability to control the environment there already is questionable, So then to make this claim that, well, there might be a civil war, and kind of ignores that to a certain extent we've been arming and training one side of a civil war, what is effectively in a large part a civil war. I mean, if you look at how many Afghan soldiers are dying versus American, and how many, you could see that in a large part this is partially a civil war. Just one side is the government, the corrupt government we're trying to prop up, So, I mean, how long do you have to keep it up is the question. I mean, how many more years will it take? 10, 20, 30 more for the Afghan government to be able to even provide a small security bubble in its capital?
Right. That's one of the things I read in the DePetrus article earlier today that I thought was interesting, where he pointed out that, they're saying that it's too soon to leave, but they're not saying exactly what's going to change in the next couple of years versus the past 20 that would change the situation where when the U.S. leaves, it's not going to be civil war, that the Taliban will eventually win. It doesn't seem like that's a possibility of something that could happen. We have I think this one's from Tolo News, right, that the Taliban say that if the U.S. forces stay, they'll continue to fight. And I was reading in the Cigar report, I think it's the 50th quarterly report on that war, they put out, that's a special inspector general for the Afghan war. In the past quarter, the insider attacks were at the lowest number they've been in the past. I think throughout the war, actually, that they really hadn't happened. And so if the Taliban are saying that they're going to continue to fight and that they've seemed to have been laying off the past at least few months, with this peace deal coming into effect, I'm very nervous about, American deaths starting to pile up. Not very much, but 10 and 20 would be up significantly from the past couple of years. And then how are we ever going to leave?
And that the other aspect of that is that during that time, I mean, we've been trying to be relatively careful about this, and I can't remember all the ins and outs of the negotiations, but part of the deal was that we wouldn't be directly attacking the Taliban that the Afghan National Army could fight with the Taliban, Taliban could fight with them, but that we wouldn't directly fight with each other during this phase of the negotiations. And on several occasions, we did do, I forget what city it was in, but we did, so I think it was in Lashkar Gah. We did some bombing directly against the Taliban, or so it was claimed, and it's a little bit of a dispute. So not only were we kind of in breach of the truce already, but the Taliban did lay off of us. They clearly did. And now they're declaring, and it's already sort of ticking up, where they're declaring that if we're not going to be in earnest on any of our peace treaties with any country we ever try to make peace with, we'll just reverse it when a new president comes in, then how are we ever going to get out? How will we ever negotiate a peace if we can't be trusted to keep our end of the bargain?
Right. That seems like a big problem, and not just only with U.S. policy in Afghanistan now, but similarly with North Korea and Iran, where the U.S. has just been on a spree breaking deals. And we're not going to talk a whole lot about Iran today, but the Biden administration is signaling that the Iranians have to commit to the deal first, and then we'll assess if we'll lift sanctions. It's absolutely insane what they're talking about there. And
of course, you do everything we want, and then we'll think about it. That's the U.S. method of bargaining.
Right. And nobody else gets to remember history either. So if another country ever went back on a deal, they would never, you still hear about 1980 and the hostages in Iran and all that, today. That's 10 years before I was even alive. It's ancient history to me. But yet, this is probably going to poison the well for talks with the Taliban for years to come. I don't know why they would feel the need to trust the U.S. now that, they'll have peace and lay off fighting for a few months and then the U.S. will leave. But I'm sure the Biden administration is just going to, just like they are with Iran, that, nothing happened in the 4 years since they left office. And hell, this is, 2008 and he's coming in as vice president, and the Taliban should just listen to what he has to say, like we never broken a deal with them in the past. And so in 4 years, when they're pretending like, oh, the Taliban won't sign a deal with us, I guess I won't wonder why, but that seems like it's going to have to be a huge problem here.
Yeah, I don't. It's time to get out. It's been enough already. There's somebody please tell me what the path forward is, because no one seems to have any ideas, and they haven't for 20 years now.
Right. And there's, as you say, there's no ability to provide security in the country. And you would think, I believe in 2017, at the beginning of the Trump administration, they proposed a kind of operation that was going to be like Operation Iron something around Kabul, where they were going to stop attacks in that city, and they haven't been able to do it. So if they can't even make anything up in that one city, how are they going to expand to the whole country when, again, we've already been there for 20 years? It's quite staggering. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's what, 10,000 casualties every year for the last 6 years. 10,000 civilians killed every year for the last 6 years, and we're saying, and now there might be a civil war. There's no ability to provide any kind of security there, and as many of those casualties are from our bombs, but still a good number of them are from the fighting between the government and the Taliban and other forces, and it's just absurd to say that we're achieving anything.
Yeah, one of the things that I kind of feel, or one of the analogies that I've used for Afghanistan, is almost like it seems like a stock market where we've been propping up the Afghan government, and then there's going to have to be a correction when the U.S. leaves, and so we
Hmm.
could continue to drop bombs to prop up the Afghan government. Of course, here it's not measly dollars that are worthless or just typed into a computer screen, but the cost is real human lives, blood that has to be spilled of innocent children to keep this government propped up and in power. And also the fact that this government that we propped up in Afghanistan is extremely corrupt and engaging in all their own kind of horrendous crimes, and that, we're also de facto supporting by propping up that government. But again, there's nothing that they could, it doesn't seem that they could fundamentally do to change anything. I don't know, any final words on Afghanistan, any fundamental changes that you could see happening during the Biden administration, or is the only solution just hopefully eventually to one day leave?
I I have not heard anything new under there doesn't seem to be anything new under the sun. There's no strategy that has seemed to make any difference. And it it's only and your analogy is exactly spot on with the stock market, with just why if you were throwing good lives after wasted, we're propping up this government at the cost of, for us the financial cost is probably the smallest part, but the moral cost, the lives that we're wasting every day, you know to keep that government propped up. And like as you said, it's a corrupt government in the first place. There's nothing about it anyone really has to respect. So at some point, whenever this ends, there's going to be a reckoning, and it's unfortunate, but the only thing we're doing is causing more bleeding, for a patient that's about to die. We're just putting a transfusion on a patient that's bleeding out and not plugging into the wounds, you know
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it'd be one thing if they're rolling out some grand strategy of how they're going to fix it. Although, of course, if they do have a new strategy, I'm guessing that's going to require sending more troops in. I saw that they were saying that they felt their options were limited because they only had 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. My response to that is good. They should be limited at this point, but uh, they pretend like it's a bad thing that they can't surge 100,000 troops in tomorrow. I guess. Are you ready to move on and talk a little bit about Yemen?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So of course this is the worst thing happening, but you came and said, hey, maybe there's a little bit of good news, and so Canada is apparently blocking some weapons going to Saudi Arabia. What's going on with that?
So, following after there was a pretty neat event I think on the 25th that was sort of centered around trying to pressure Biden to keep follow through on his promise. And you guys around the same time were, had an interview talking about some skepticism, justified, that Biden's going to do the right thing here and follow through. It's Horton's law. Every politician keeps, you can count on them to throw out all their good promises and keep all their bad ones. So the Yemen promise probably isn't worth much. But during the day of action for Yemen, which was run by the left wing organizations Code Pink and Stop War UK and whatnot, they got Ro Khanna on the call, along with who's the progressive Jeremy Corbyn, some key figures, some Canadian government figures, and as well as Irish government figures, all saying they were going to be introducing different bills, including Ro Khanna saying he was going to re-enter a privileged war powers resolution at some point. It hasn't happened yet. I haven't seen any further action since he said it on the 25th, but that there's going to be process that he's working with Senator Sanders, he said specifically. So there's some promise that on the congressional front, that's a privilege resolution, so it could get pushed up, and it'll be harder for them to block, and it'll make an issue of it. It may get played down by the media, but at the same time, it's not just the United States that the Saudis depend on. As you mentioned, in Canada, some protesters followed the lead of there were some Italians who did this before. They started just protesting and blocking armor shipments, and they got the attention of a Canadian minister who's going to be introducing some legislation there. Now, no promise that it'll pass. This could just be the progressive wing of their party. I don't know enough about Canadian politics, but they got some support, political support, for blocking arms shipments to Saudi in Canada. The Italians actually won a court case. They're actually a major bomb supplier to Saudi Arabia as well. They supply about, I want to say it was going to be about 12,000 to 20,000 bombs that were headed for Saudi Arabia, and by way of Saudi Arabia to Yemeni civilians. The court agreed with a finding, and that bomb supplier that's based in Sicily is actually going to be blocked from selling those bombs to the Saudis. So this kind of, even if the United States, there's only a small glimmer of hope, like this combined pressure is building in a way that's somewhat promising. There's the Italian court, and the new government has blocked a sale to Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis have to be feeling some of the pressure, even if the temporary hold that Blinken announced the other day is just a feint to placate people and keep them quiet. I think it shows that there's a little bit of pressure mounting, and like I said, the War Powers Resolution and other governments at least acting, because they aren't just buying from us, shows a little bit of positive movement in that direction that gives me at least a little bit of hope.
Yeah, I mean, these movements are great. I will say I've seen them in the past in European countries, especially after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. That was some notoriety enough, I think, to prompt some more actions like this. I think Italy actually, and maybe France or the UK, they were like ship workers that were refusing to load certain weapons, saying to Saudi Arabia. And so those kinds of things are great. I guess one of the problem is the Trump administration took steps to, I think, with either Raytheon or Boeing, to build the JDAMs just directly in Saudi Arabia. And so then they'll cut out the need, to get missiles and bombs from other places.
America first, except if America first, we've got to make those arms deals, but
right. Well, crazy. Trump put his hand on the glowing orb, and I guess they convinced him Saudi first there. I was reading today too, because everybody would talk about jobs, right? That's the big critique of this. So we gotta sell these bombs to Saudi Arabia, because if we don't, somebody else would, and then we might as well get the jobs and the profits, because it's gonna happen anyways. Apparently, assembly line workers for Raytheon are only making like $15 an hour. So it's not even like these are good paying jobs. These people are making like $35,000 a year, I mean, the executives at these companies, I'm sure, General Lloyd Austin, when he was sitting on the board of Raytheon a couple months ago, he was raking in a hell of a lot more than $35,000 a year. But I don't think it provides jobs like they pretend that it does. So I mean, I'm glad you came on and expressed some optimism here. I guess in a lot of ways there doesn't seem to be much a cause to argue for this. The Iran excuse is pretty weak, and I mean, I don't know. I guess the only thing is that it could receive so little attention, especially the way we're already seeing the media cover the Biden administration, where they're talking more about how cute the press secretary is and the Dodds, and how, Jill Biden, they're writing a story saying that Jill Biden just gave Michelle Obama fruit that she grew in the White House garden like 2 weeks ago, right? That Jill Biden came in. Like, how could she have grown vegetables in that time? Or that she's out there tending the garden anyways. But anyways, that's like kind of the stuff that's taking up a lot of the news right now. So I'm thinking that Yemen's kind of going to get lost, and that their plan's going to be to say, we're going to review the Trump policies. We're not going to put on the sanctions right away. We'll hold up, or we're not going to hold up weapons sales that are actually, like weapons that Saudi needs right now, but that F-35 contract that's going to take a couple of years to develop, or for the new Patriots or whatever they want, that's going to be under review for a few months until the heat lifts, and then they're going to slowly push it all through.
Yeah, and it didn't stop them from sending there's a New Hampshire National Guard unit, Defend the Guard, being sent off to probably Saudi Arabia. Spartan Shield is what they call it. That's the operation, I think, protecting the Saudi oil fields and doing training exercise with the Saudis. They did a farewell ceremony just yesterday for that. So it's not like we're still not sending troops there to prop them up. So cautiously optimistic is what I would describe it. And you're absolutely right. They'll probably wait till there's a busy news day, wait till there's some other melodrama happening, and then they'll slip in that the Yemen arms deals are going to be, green flagged and waved through. So it's cautious optimism. The other thought I came across this on that day of action for Yemen. There were some sort of counter tweets that were interesting. And it's worth noting that Yemen, like you sort of have highlighted here, there was, from a good chunk of Yemeni history, it was two countries. There was South Yemen and North Yemen, and most of North Yemen is in your blue and green area there, right? Or do I have those reversed?
You have it reversed.
Yes.
The Houthis control most of what was North Yemen.
Geographically, the Houthi area is, anyways, the red area is North Yemen, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
And so the outline broadly there it's not that different, I suspect, from the original. I mean, and the Saudis have another government that they've propped up. So I wonder if there's a chance of a peace settlement, and this is just purely speculative, of just dividing the country again. I wonder what it is about North Yemen why they can't separate those two countries again, and maybe that could put a stop to some of this, or put some of this to rest.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, I guess. I know when North and South Yemen were separate, North Yemen controlled, I think the Houthis control a lot of the same population centers, which are all in the west of the country. But as far as the east of the country goes, there's some oil resources out there. And the previous North Yemen controlled a lot more of that territory, even if it's sparsely populated, mostly desert. But there's resource interest there. And I believe there's also resource interest looking into the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen, and almost all that territory I would assume would be controlled by the Houthis. I mean, the Saudi-backed government does control a lot of the coastline, but that's just because it's flat and the Houthis don't have air power. And so they really can't maintain it. But the Saudis also can't run supply lines there, so it's not like that's territory that they could hold forever. So assuming that the Houthis would get the coastline and the settlement, that would probably entitle them to the offshore oil resources, and I think that would be one of the issues. One of the other things I'll just note on the weapon sales and stuff like that, and this might not apply to Saudi Arabia yet, but definitely applies to the UAE, and that is the Abraham Accord, which isn't a peace deal, but everybody pretends like it is, and everybody in the establishment knows it's a peace deal, right? And so I think the UAE will leverage that in order to get the weapons, that they'll say no, that this was part of it, and then that they'll back out of their normalization of relations with Israel, which is only a PR stunt. I mean, the connections there are so deep. What, now Israel settlements get to sell their wine in the UAE to the rich princes of Dubai? I mean, that's something, but that's also, not, the UAE won't give up a fleet of F-35s for that. And so, and if the UAE is successful there, I wonder if Saudi Arabia would consider doing some official normalization type moves in order to get the weapon sales coming through. You have one more thing up here on Yemen, and I actually scrolled through it and saw it online on Twitter today, but didn't have a chance to look into it. Tell me about this Hunger Ward screening.
So Hunger Ward is a pretty short 40-minute documentary about two different hospitals in North Yemen, where they are dealing with the massive humanitarian crisis there of children starving. They're doing these sort of free screenings. I caught one, I guess, last Saturday or the Saturday before, and there's another one tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. And it was just a really powerful, moving documentary that, if it doesn't kind of mobilize you and motivate you to at least try to act up a little bit about Yemen and draw some more attention to it. I mean, it's difficult. It can be hard to watch a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. It hits you really hard in the feelings. But I think if every American saw this tomorrow, then people would be beating down the White House doors to put a stop to this war. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where if you eat your vegetables on this one, you're not going to regret it, and it's gonna push you to care more about this issue. You know?
All right, and I'm just wondering. So it's you said about 40 minutes. I will stick the link in this. Oh, I don't know if it'll be. I'll tweet out. I'll have tweeted out the link because I'm pretty sure the show will air after this most recent one. But maybe follow the account. It sounds like they're doing pretty regular screenings, so you could catch one. I'm sure eventually they'll just put it out for anybody to watch. I'll try to register and catch it tomorrow. You said 4 p.m. or 6 p.m. I'm assuming that's Eastern time. And anything else on the documentary? I mean, is does it really take a side in the war issue, or is it just kind of saying like this is what's happening to this poor country?
I think it's more of the latter. It's more of this is what's happening. It's more focused on the humanitarian crisis, but they do an interview about some people that suffered at Saudi out. I'd have to go back and rewatch to see if they mentioned specifically that it was a Saudi bomber, but they talk about the double tap on a wedding that the Saudis did that killed, that only a few people survived. They talked to one of the survivors. So even if they don't explicitly mention the Saudis, and I don't know whether they do or not, as long as you can put two and two together and figure out who has the ability to drop American-made bombs and American-made jets with American-trained pilots, then you'll be able to piece that together pretty easily. Who's responsible if they don't mention it explicitly?
Right. All right. Let's talk about Myanmar or Burma before we wrap up here. This is a country that's not always on people's radar. For anybody watching the YouTube video of the show, you will see a map here. Myanmar seems to be in a pretty geopolitically strategic location. It borders Thailand, Laos, China, India, Bangladesh, the Indian Ocean. It has a lot of coastline. And, the last time I really talked about, and the only time I talked about Myanmar on the show, is to talk about the plight of the Rohingya, which is a Muslim minority group in Myanmar that faced an ethnic cleansing campaign in August of 2017. And that Myanmar is a country where the military was basically in charge, but even then, the civilian leadership of the country, including the, I guess, now deposed president, went along and helped, fill the PR campaign there and everything. So with that, at one point it seemed like the, civilian leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, I think maybe I'm saying
I hear
her
it
name right.
pronounced Aung San Suu Kyi more frequently,
Okay.
But I'm not sure anyone's positive how to say it.
I just read it, so I'm sure I'm the most wrong of anyone. She has now been arrested by the military. Again, even though, pretty recently they were somewhat in sync and stuff like that. And the U.S. response is maybe sanctions. So what do you think about this coup and maybe sanctions?
So, I mean, as I understand it, the military government there, the military, junta that ran the country for, I think, somewhere around 30 years, quite some time. And Aung San Suu Kyi was a dissenter who was under house arrest for a good number of years, and eventually became sort of the star political dissident that, the government that we like to prop up. And she won, I think, I'm not sure what the year was that she came to power, but essentially, and it was strange, she didn't actually win the presidency outright, but she became the de facto leader, and immediately was given a Nobel Peace Prize. After, years of living under house arrest, she becomes the de facto leader. Her position wasn't exactly president, as I understand it. It's a little complicated, but this was at this point, after a few years in power, I want to say she's been in power since around 2016. She won the election for the president, and the military junta that has been tolerating her as this sort of de facto head of state has reversed that election and has reinserted themselves as the power. And so she always had a very tenuous grasp on power. I think in part, as I understand it, the massacre of the Rohingya and the expulsion there that happened while she was in power. I'm not going to say which side she came down on it, but that she probably had a bull by the horns to a certain extent, negotiating with the military. If she is, and at some point she did sort of seem to become an apologist for it publicly. There were at least trying to downplay some of what the military was doing and stave off the sanctions, because we did reimpose some sanctions on. We had pretty heavy sanctions that only started in, I want to say, 2012. They were lifted when she came to power, and then when the massacre of the Rohingya started, which is a Muslim minority that was sort of driven into Bangladesh, we reimposed some sanctions, and it's just yet another example. But even then, there's no evidence that the sanctions we imposed played any role in ousting the military in the first place to put her into power. I think there's some research that was done basically pointing out like that the GDP of the country didn't fall at all. They just shifted their trading patterns to other countries. They just found other allegiances, and that there was no real effect economically on them. It was just us trying to sanction half the world to get our way, and achieving nothing except pushing them closer to the arms of other countries, and damaging our own trade, which there was some trade with them. I think I forget exactly what it was that we traded with them, but the imposition of sanctions had no effect in the past. But it seems to be that the only tool we have in our toolkit is the military or sanctions, and obviously that they're going. I suspect they'll try to reinstall them, reassert sanctions if this coup holds. But if they do, especially in the time being, they border China. I guess they're a natural gas exporter. They border with China. We're going to push them probably closer into the arms of our great power foe that we're constantly beating the drums against as well. If we were to, that's all that it will achieve, I suspect, is if we sanction them to reverse this coup, counter coup almost, then that's all that's likely to come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. That it's just that the U.S. doesn't seem to have options here, and that was kind of what Doug Bandow points out in his article at the American Conservative today. Daniel DePetrus also has a good one, making very much the same point, that at best, sanctions will drive into the arms of China. Also, if the economy does start to drop in Myanmar, it'll give the military a pretty good excuse for why it's happening. They'll be like, well, things be better, but it's the American sanctions. We see that used over and over again with sanctions. And maybe some of the like very targeted sanctions against maybe just one military commander isn't the kind of thing that's going to really hurt the Myanmar economy. But once the sanctions don't work, the only response then is more sanctions. Eventually the sanctions will get broad enough, like they are in Syria, Iran, Venezuela. I guess North Korea is a little bit different right now, because they've, I think, essentially sanctioned themselves with this COVID thing and have stopped like even all the illegal trade going on with China. But up until a recent point, the sanctions on North Korea as well were really hurt the civilian populations of those countries, and were the cause for a lot of the suffering there. And once you start walking down this path of they have to do what they say, it's like you see a parent start to yell at a child, but they have actually nowhere to escalate because they're in the middle of a grocery store, but they're like making these empty threats, so they have to like keep escalating. The child keeps escalating until it's like in a full-on temper tantrum in the store. That's I think kind of the situation that the U.S. often finds itself in, where it's wagging its finger and saying you can't behave like this, but then the country, doesn't listen. It says, well, then we're going to cut economic trades. And it still doesn't listen. It says, well, then we're going to do even, more sanctions and force the international community to sanction you and all these other things. And it never ends up working to achieve the desired outcome.
You're grounded forever.
Right.
I mean?
Right.
you're grounded for 1 day. No, 2 days. Make it 2 weeks. You're grounded forever, and that doesn't achieve anything. It's laughable that's like the best our foreign policy elite can come up with, is to just ground everyone we don't like forever. And I don't know about you, but I sort of see that at some point down the road. I mean, what's crazy is that you and I would probably be the ones that would be slandered as isolationists when the foreign policy elite that runs our country, the best solution they can come up with to any problem is to try to isolate ourselves from cut off trade with whoever angers us or disappoints us in some way.
Right.
And they don't get the smear of isolationist. It's truly absurd that it's just, or it's, if you think about it in those terms, it's Orwell. And eventually, if we were sanctioning major export, like, I can't even begin to name all the countries in the world we have heavy sanctions against. But if you sanction them all, eventually they're going to, what I just was listening today about Russia moving its reserve currencies in gold. Its reserves in gold have exceeded the U.S. dollar, and it's one of the first countries. More and more countries are going to move away from the dollar as a reserve currency as we push and push and push them away from us.
Right.
It's not going to help. It's going to make things worse, because eventually it will have an effect on the dollar and its value in trade.
Right.
Well,
and not to mention, I imagine there has to be a growing kind of, law of diminishing returns, where if you're trying to sanction one country in the planet, that may be somewhat effective. But if you sanction 20 countries, those 20 countries are just going to be like, we're all sanctioned, we'll trade with each other. And so I know we've seen this between like Iran and Venezuela. I'm guessing, again, with proximity here, kind of being along the coast of the Indian Ocean, it won't be very hard for Iran to engage, assuming there's, mutual reasons for trade. If the U.S. does go with heavy sanctions, Iran, and there's so many countries that are heavily sanctioned now, as you mentioned, Russia, China's heavily sanctioned, North Korea, Zimbabwe, Iran, Syria, northern Yemen, at least, Venezuela, Honduras, El Salvador, Cuba. There's probably a few more Latin American countries I'm not catching there. That all these countries are going to, I think, just, engage in more and more trade away from the U.S. dollar. And as you say, it hurts the U.S. dollar, but it also makes whatever impact the sanctions are going to have less effective. And probably for like the ruling classes, who are going to get what they want to come in, and not as much for the peasants who aren't going to get, their needs met.
Yeah. It's a ridiculous situation for us to just keep trying what's failed and achieve nothing over and over again. But
right,
what can you do?
I mean, I guess this was one of my big fears of like Biden versus Trump, which is the Trump administration at times seems so chaotic, where they did levy sanctions here, and it was, I think, mostly against the military. I don't know if it had a huge impact on the economy there or the civilian population, but it didn't seem like they were very concerned about getting involved, even though there was 1 million people chased out of the country. And now that we had the Biden team in, the Samantha Powers, who, every time they see anything that looks anything like Rwanda, they throw their hands up in the air and they say, we have to do everything humanly possible to stop this, or every death that occurs will be on our hands. And no matter how many people they kill in trying to stop, those people from dying, they'll, claim it's worth it. So, Scott, what, anything else? Or if not, tell people where they could find your work.
No, I think we hit a lot of the key things tonight. So yeah, you can find me. My Twitter handle is @MDVet4. Also @Antiwar Podcast. You can email me antiwarpodcast@gmail.com if you have any, or DM me on Twitter if you have any moments, any pivot points in your life that made you change your opinion about war. I have one episode in the can and another one about to do tomorrow that's going to be a big one. So like, share, and subscribe. The title of the podcast is Why I Am Antiwar. And also check out that Yemen documentary. It's called Hunger Ward. It's being hosted by the Friends, the Quaker Society. And there will be a link in the chat as well. So,
all right. Links will be at the show notes page at YouTube, Libertarian Institute, and Library LRBY, where all the episodes are now found. Thank you very much, Scott, for coming back on.
Thanks, Kyle. Have a good night.
You too.